Welcome to You Can't Get to Heaven in a Miniskirt. My name is Jessica, and Sarah is not with us right now. She was unable to come on for the intro, so you just have me. So I'm sorry to all the Sarah stans out there. It is just me right now. But we have a really great episode today. Before I jump into that, if you want to follow us on social media, you can follow us on Instagram at Heaven in a Miniskirt. You can go to our website at heaveninaminiskirt.com. If you would like to support this show, we would love to have you over on our Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/heaveninaminiskirt, and that's where you're going to find all of our bonus episodes. You can also subscribe through Apple Podcasts. So today we have a guest on. His name is Jérémie, and he is the host of the Hérétique podcast. I hope I did well with that French accent because I don't speak French. And the way that we connected with Jérémie is that Sarah actually does speak French, and she was looking for French deconstruction content and came across Jérémie's podcast. And I guess it's quite good from what Sarah says. She likes it a lot. And he interviews theologians and authors and artists and people that generally are deconstructing just to talk about the state of deconstruction. And Jérémie lives in France. So what was so interesting about this conversation was learning about how deconstruction is kind of working within, well, France specifically, but also Europe, and how different it is from North America, but also how similar it is, and our experiences being very similar. So that is the intro. Just a little information here. Sarah does a story time with Sarah at the end. She does it in French. You can skip ahead if you don't speak French because we end up speaking English later. She does the story of Jesus sending demons into pigs. So if you're wondering what the story was, that's what it is. I just tuned out for that because, again, I haven't spoken French since high school, which was several years ago. So thank you so much for listening and supporting us through this journey. And we really hope you enjoy this conversation.
I like the buddy feel between the two of you on your podcast. I like the friends recording podcast stuff. It's just, we can tell you like good friends, and it has this kind of Anglo-Saxon American-ish vibe. Like Europeans, they're sometimes a bit more serious, and I like the banter on your podcast.
Oh yeah,
thank you.
We definitely like to be silly. So, how did you guys connect?
Instagram.
Well, I'm always looking for French content that I can consume as a way to be immersed in French in day to day. And then I was like, ooh, I wonder what's out there for the evangelical deconstruction side. And that's where I found Hérétique. And I just like reached out to you, and that's how we connected.
Yeah. There's not much actually in French.
No, I was very surprised because sometimes I'll post memes in French, but typically the vast majority of our audience is English speaking. We have people from all over the world that listen, but English is the common point because we are an English podcast.
Yes, but to my knowledge, in French, there's like the two of us. There's like mauvaise foi. So
mauvaise foi.
I don't know how mauvaise foi. They were like they're a few years before me, but really on deconstructing. I was not really interested in the topics they were dealing with, but for the French community, it was like a big thirst. And then a few years later, I came in and I have more of a sociologic approach, like more a testimony approach, more than just debating about theological ideas. I'm not really interested in that. But in 2024, there's only mauvaise foi and me, and we're good friends. But there's more people coming. There's like a journalist who does a whole investigation on Hillsong Paris.
Oh, cool.
And she's like doing a work to keep them accountable for what they're doing. And so there's a few
kind of media personalities, a few things out there.
But they're kind of emerging, but it's still early on.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Why do you think that is? Do you think there's less French people that are dealing with this? Or do you think it's just maybe they're a little later in starting their deconstruction?
Yes, we always say that Europe is like 10 years behind the American continent on those kind of topics. And then you have to add the fact that the evangelical community is less strong in Europe than it is in the US or Canada and stuff. So it's a smaller minority, but what we have going here, especially in France, and we're scared for the next election, is the Catholic right. So they're close to the Christian right in the US. But here, the evangelical will be saying, we've got nothing to do with the Christian right in the US, like really. But actually, when you look up, so they're not politically really heavy, but they're ideologically super close to the Catholic Christian right, who's like anti-LGBT, anti-abortion, the classic. And we kind of scared that the extreme right will be in presidency.
I think it's it's very concerning because that is a common theme across the Western world right now.
Yes.
Having these far right politicians that are coming up, and in Canada too, you always feel like you're immune to, you see the United States and you're like, those evangelicals are crazy. And you think you're immune to those political repercussions. But like, we now have like provinces that are banning gender affirming care for youth. So there is a huge political uprising of the far right and the Christian far right. And it is terrifying for sure. So maybe we've talked a little bit, but maybe Jeremy, you can tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into the space.
Sure. Yeah. So Jeremy, I'm 35. I'm from Belgium, but I've been living in Paris for the last 11 years. I'm what we call an ex-evangelical. I grew up in that culture since I was a baby, really. I've been a good Christian boy for a long time. I ticked all the boxes, like all the crazy boxes. And I grew up, and mostly in the charismatic evangelical movement. What else? I've been an illustrator for 10 years, and I've been doing podcasts for the last 5 years. I'm really butchering my story, but really, I love podcasts. Like, I'm a huge fan of podcasts, especially because it's like a space where we learn to listen. And it's really important for me because previously in the past, I was always in the position of like telling people, evangelizing people and trying to save people. Well, the whole shebang, you know what it is. And podcasting is starting to listen. So I started deconstructing, I think, like 9 years ago. And 12 years ago, when I was in the UK, I was having my best life. I was living in England. I went to England initially to go to Bible school. So I studied 1 year in a seminary. I think that's how you call it in English.
Yeah, seminary.
Yeah, seminary. Back then I thought it was, I'm doing theological studies. It was seminary. It was Bible school. It's not exactly the same. It was like more missionary. It was, I had no idea back then, but now I have the vocabulary to understand I was part of the New Apostolic movement. So,
were you associated with New Frontiers at that point?
No, it was another family of churches, but they're really close to New Frontiers. And I loved my life. It was great. And then I had like mental health issues. I remember that nothing was scaring me until that point in my life because I ticked all the boxes. God was with me. I had no issues. I just had a girlfriend, was working as a graphic designer for a Christian charity. Everything was going well. And then suddenly my mental health goes wrong. And I had nothing my whole worldview was magical and spiritual. So I had no tools to understand what was happening to me. And people were saying, yeah, you're in spiritual battle because you work for a Christian charity. Yes. Well, oh my God. And now I've been to therapy and stuff. And now I'm really okay with it, but I know I suffered intrusive thoughts and I had like obsessive thinking, and I know they were related to purity culture also. It was all linked. And back then I used all the tools of like a classic charismatic evangelical young man, and nothing was working, and I was desperate.
You pray, you fast, accountability partner.
Yes, the whole thing, being on my knees, crying. I mean, it was terrible. And it's only a few years later when I moved to Paris. It went on for like 6 months and I didn't sleep well for 6 months. I lost a lot of weight and I basically left England just to save my life, really, because it was really a dark time. And I came to France to come closer to my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and to become an illustrator. So my life was happy again. But then after getting married, so 2 years later, maybe, some mental health issues came back, intrusive thoughts and the whole thing, but I had no vocabulary back then. So started therapy and really helped me. And then I started to look into what was wrong. And so purity culture, and then started listening to podcasts. And then my worldview started going broader. And when I went to Paris, I went to another church who was New Frontiers related. And as my worldviews opened up, and I was really in a church that was all about signs and miracles and how God is big and powerful, and that's how the world will know. Very warm community also of loving people, really kind people, loved them, still love them, by the way. But as I was doing like this work on therapy and getting to know my weaknesses and fragilities, and it was weird because I was contacting my humanity. I was kind of a robot before then, just working fine. And then suddenly, bang, who you are as a human being just hits you hard. And at one point I was just like, I think I can't keep up with this whole strong God, spiritual battle, signs and miracles and stuff. And as my worldview just became larger, and issues about women, about LGBT, about all, just getting to understand that it was really a conservative environment at one point in 2019, before COVID. I like to tell it because there's a lot of, I don't know how it was in Canada, but here, a lot of people stopped going to church because of COVID, because they couldn't go. Yeah. And then they were like, why should I go? Because actually I don't really enjoy it anymore. So for me, it was prior. And the moment, I like to say, I decided to go to the desert to take a bit more distance,
The desert?
And,
like Jesus did for the 40
exactly,
days.
Sister, you get it.
Got you.
Yes. But it was just taking distance. I just needed to take a break. I couldn't recognize myself in the evangelical etiquette. I think a lot of people experience the same in North America. And at that moment, I launched my first podcast. I've got 3 now, Sens Créatif, which is like a illustration, comic book, graphic design, creative community. That was great. But a few years later, I was like, I really think I would like to recreate the same for the kind of evangelical community, because it's really strong. And I think for like 2 or 3 years, I kept it to myself. And at one point I started to really connect with a lot of people, and like, oh, you too, you lived, okay, oh my God. And then, oh, we should talk about it. And then it took me 3 years really I maybe messed up the time here. Sorry for the hardcore fans who know me really well and Jérémie, not really correct. But it took me 3 years to really get off the ground Hérétique, because I don't know how it was lived for you, but for me it was nearly like a coming out, like to really be like, well, actually I think it's difficult for people who grew up in that
absolutely
culture. So there you go.
We've been with our getting the podcast off the ground. We had deconstructed years and years ago. How many years has it been, Sarah?
Just for some context, Jessica and I met when we were in grade 7, so around 12 years old. And then we were in high school all together, and I was Baptist, Jessica was Catholic. I brought Jessica to youth group and Christian camp, and she got saved and everything. And then we had friends from the Christian camp we worked at that were going to a New Frontiers church in our hometown. And then we got involved with New Frontiers, but I got way deeper than Jessica. I ended up taking a gap year after graduating high school, and then going and working in the UK for a year. It was very common, especially in the UK, to go and do a ministry year. So you would study theology, and then you would be working 80 hours a week in a church. So you're just totally burnt out, and you're just working for free as an 18-year-old. And that's a whole other story. But essentially I was told that I couldn't leave. The elders of the church sat me down and said that I wasn't allowed to leave the UK because it was God's will for me to go to New Day, this like big conference. I don't know if you've heard of New Day.
I think it rings a bell. I think it rings a bell.
Yeah. So it's like a big conference in the UK, and they're like, God's going to do something big for you at New Day. So like you need to stay here and you can't go home. But I was like, I want to go be with my family for the summer. So I had to get my support system to come to the UK, and essentially like they threatened to go to the media before the church was like, okay, you can go home. So it was like a very like culty, male authoritarian sort of experience for me. And then I came home and backslid or did all I was drinking and doing drugs and having sex. And then I
classic.
Yeah, classic. And then I like dabbled back in the church for a couple of years and ultimately left in about like 2010, 2011. And Jessica, I think like you were 2009, probably.
Yeah, 2009.
2008, 2009 when you left the church. So we're 33. So we'd be a couple of years younger than you.
Yeah. So then when we started the podcast, like everyone in our lives like knew that we were not Christian. So it wasn't too much of a shock, I don't think.
Oh, yes. Okay.
We were able
We had some barriers though.
Yeah, we had a few barriers.
Started.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Which kinds?
People in our lives that are very Christian that were upset that we were going to do this. And we ultimately just said, whatever, like that's your prerogative. It was difficult though. It's difficult.
But we weren't thinking about it for years. Like what had happened was Jessica lives across the country and we're still best friends. And I had gone to visit her after she'd had her first baby. And we were just like hanging out and we watched the Hillsong documentary.
Oh, yeah.
And we just kept pausing it every few minutes and like talking about it.
And we hadn't talked about or thought about Christianity in years. Like,
no.
Especially me, like it had been like 10 years since I even dabbled in this subject.
Yeah. I mean, I thought about it because more people in my life are still
in the church.
But why then, if it's like back in your life, why resurrect the topic?
Why? That's a great question.
That's a great
Jérémie.
question. You know what's interesting? So when we watched the Hillsong documentary, I think what I didn't realize at the time is that I actually never properly deconstructed. I just left, and my family is not really religious. So I was able to just leave and like just cut ties, and I was out, and then I just started a new life essentially. So I never deconstructed until we started the podcast. And I think with the Hillsong documentary, we realized how many experiences Sarah and I have, and like we want to add our voice to the fight against culty religions, essentially.
And I think too, like just realizing like how profoundly deep those experiences impacted us. And like for me, so I'm gay, but I married a man and then like had 2 children and then came out. Like, and so I feel like there's so many things tied up within like how the purity culture, but how the church, how the only form of sexuality that is okay is, you know, man and woman who are married. And that's the only thing that's permitted. So I think there are so many harmful narratives within evangelical Christianity. And I mean, I think it's positive that's starting to change. You see progressive Christians that are affirming of LGBT, and we are all for amplifying those kinds of voices. People that are like, yeah, we believe in evolution, or like we've had Christian scientists on our podcast, and we're not here to say that you cannot be a Christian or you cannot have faith, but we're like trying to figure out how to bridge the gap because society is so polarized right now and no one's having conversations.
A friend of mine asked me, but why do you care? Why do you not burn it down and walk away? And the real answer for me is like the people who are into those religious systems. And somehow all I want to say is like, people can have beliefs and they can believe whatever they want, as long as it's not harmful. But then getting into the nitty-gritty of the systems that are oppressive and creating harmful theology. Also, I'm not really into theology. I'm not really interested about that. But it's more like studying the systems and
power structures.
It's like, yes, exactly. Power structures. And it's like, take care of the people into those structures. And I also like to say sometimes a bit like a joke is like that the gospel is too important to leave it to fundamentalists and fundamentalist people. I mean, I think there's a lot of conservative and fundamentalist voices, and I want to, like you, add another voice to the conversation. I'm not here to bash anyone. It's just like, hey, there's a lot of voices that are unheard. I'm going to let those voices be heard. And can we have a collective discussion? I get a lot of messages saying, I'm not agreeing with everything, but I find it really interesting. And I'm like, hey, that's the best compliment I can get, because great that you disagree on things, because that's a good, that's interesting. But the fact that it makes me think, and maybe we should rethink things. And I think now is a good time. Like, I can feel like a shift in the culture.
A cultural shift, yeah.
And I'm like, yes, bring it on. That's the time.
That's how it feels. It feels like the right time to do something like this. And like you said, people are like, why would you do this? Like you said, why don't you just walk away? And I think that if we walk away, we're not helping the people that need help.
Yes.
There's a lot of people that are deconstructing that have know where to turn. And there's a lot of very loud preachers out there. And why can't we be loud too? Again, if there's someone listening that's Christian, like, that's wonderful. It doesn't matter to me what you personally believe in terms of like your faith and your faith in a higher being. Like, I do not care, but it's the harmful structures that, if you just look at history, which, you know, Sarah and I do a lot in the podcast, like looking at the history of witch burnings, like, for example, the witch trials, we were looking into that. Like, you look at the history of colonization, you look at the history of religion and all of the oppression that has happened because of religion. And I'm just like, why can't we just try as a society to be better than this?
Yes, I agree.
While you can still hold your beliefs, you can't hurt other people with your beliefs. That's not the way it's supposed to be.
And I think sometimes people take freedom of religion to mean like, I can be hateful. And it's like, actually, there needs to be a line there. And I think it is such a difficult thing to navigate and to figure out, like, where is that line? And I think that, you know, sometimes there's so much pushback, because if we look at like one thing that I love, Jérémie, your podcast covers like the New Apostolic Reformation and like the 7 spheres of influence. And I think what people don't realize is how coordinated and how nefarious the motives are of these far-right Christians. They want a theocratic society where everything is governed by biblical law. And it's so hypocritical, because I remember being in those charismatic far-right spaces where I would hear them saying, you know, the Muslims have a caliphate and they're trying to take over the world. And I'm like, bitch, you're trying to do the same thing. And like, living in a pluralistic society is much better.
So can you explain to me, because, okay, so the reason I ask this is because there are people in my life that I've told like about Christian nationalism, and they're like, what's that? And you're like, you don't know what this is? So are you able to explain the New Apostolic Reformation and the 7 spheres of influence? I mean, it's a big subject, but like maybe just subject, concisely, if you can, like both of you guys, because I think you're both better versed in it than I am.
You want to go first, or you want me to go first?
Go first, and then I follow. Yes, I'm not specialist.
Yeah. So when I was doing a gap year in the UK, that was my first kind of introduction to the 7 spheres of influence. And it was essentially like, as Christians, it is our job to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth now. May your kingdom come, may your will be done here and now. And that was like a very new sort of idea for me, that I didn't ever hear those ideas when I was in the Baptist church. But within the New Apostolic Church, it was like, we need to strategically have people across all sectors of society with our ideals in positions of power, so that we can influence society to look like how our church community looks. And they were strategically moving groups of people to cities to plant churches. And it was so exclusionary, because Jérémie, I don't know if you've heard our episode where we talked about, I don't remember where it was, but we were talking about the Holy Spirit. And I had gone to this youth service when I was in the UK with like another church. I think they were Pentecostal, and the youth leaders kept saying to the youth, like, they have a counterfeit spirit. It's not actually the Holy Spirit. Like, their signs and wonders are like different. And so like, even like people talk about Christianity, like it's one thing, but even within Christianity, there are so many divides. And you need to keep a finger on what the New Apostolic Reformation is doing. Anything, when you hear the word dominionism, when you hear New Apostolic Reformation, when you hear spheres of influence,
7 Mountain Mandate,
7 Mountain Mandate, Christian nationalism, there's a new one. It's like Heritage 2025. And it's all about a plan that they have to Christianize the United States once Trump wins.
The thing is with the New Apostolic Reformation also is that a lot of people don't know they are into the New Apostolic Reformation It's like what André Gagné, which I've had on the podcast, who wrote the book in English. I think it's called Evangelicals Behind Trump. It's that there's a lot, not only, but a lot of charismatic and Pentecostal churches who are into the New Apostolic Reformation without knowing it.
The parishioners don't know?
Yes, they don't know. They mostly, and that's the thing that gets me crazy, is that they mostly filled with nice people who want to do good, for who bring the kingdom of God to earth is like being a good witness and being a good friend and being involved in church.
Clothing people, feeding people.
Yeah, so I know I got spiritually burned out with the whole power and signs and miracles and the spiritual warfare and stuff. And that I got burned out, but I didn't have the vocabulary to understand. And it's only when getting my nose into this for my podcast and reading books and stuff that you start to understand another few things. Like, for instance, they work in networks.
It's relationships.
Yes, exactly. It's relationships, it's network. And also the weird thing is, we forgot one thing. It's the
apostles.
The 5 ministries who are,
yes,
I don't know how you say it in English.
The fivefold ministries. Is it from Ephesians?
It's like
pastors, apostles, prophets, teachers, and
I don't know what you guys are talking about, so I can't help you.
It's like ministries who were like from Bible time, and for a lot of people, it's like, yes, that was during the first century.
Yeah, so it's Ephesians. I was right. It's Ephesians 4:11-16, but it's called the fivefold ministry. And they believe that God has sent a new wave of apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. What were you? What were you, Jeremy? I was called an evangelist.
Well, me, because I was an artist. And so my sphere of influence was like the arts. I don't know about the 5 ministries. I think there's nothing shocking about the teachers or the pastors.
I mean, there's some things I can't do because I have a vagina, but
the prophets and the apostles, that's something that you can look up for. And the weird thing is they're like religious entrepreneurs, freelancing.
Yeah, they travel around.
Yes, and they have words of knowledge and prophecies and stuff.
Words of knowledge, fuck.
Yes.
Did you just have a flashback, Sarah?
Yeah, it's just the rhetoric there. I have a picture.
Yep. Yes, exactly. There's a good, maybe the series Heaven Bends. Have you heard of Heaven Bends?
I've heard of Heaven Bends, yeah.
If you want to look it up, it's amazing. Really, yeah, it's great. But so basically, it's just, these are different things that are what the New Apostolic Reformation are. And also they don't like to be called, it's not an institution. Like you said, Sarah, it's like it's a relationship. And I remember when I started to really speak up about the podcast I was going to launch and stuff, a friend of mine wrote to me saying, hey, what did I do wrong to you? And I was like, nothing really. If you want to get into the nitty gritty, actually nothing. And he said, church is relational. It's not an institution. So if you left, it's because the church did something to you. And I'm like, it's the system, dude. It's like, it's the system and the beliefs. And he was like, he couldn't see we weren't speaking the same language, because to him, church, it's family, it's network, it's relationships. And I was like, no, it's institution, it's systems.
You can call it anything you want, but it's an institution by definition.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know if you grew up with that. Tell me. But I grew up with close people saying it's not a religion.
It's a relationship.
It's a relationship.
100%.
And I mean, it's a mind fuck, right? Because you're like, well, apples are apples, okay? It's just like, it's not because you say it's a pear that it's not an apple. And so it's the same. It's like, no, it's not an institution. It's a relationship. I'm like, no, sorry. Church is organized, so it's a system.
And even if you have apostles, it's still a hierarchy.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's just semantics, and they're using language to try to control people. Like it's like an MLM. I don't know, multi-level marketing, if you have that in Europe, but it's like it's pyramid scheme. But they say it's not a pyramid scheme, but it's a pyramid scheme. You can say it all you want, but it's still a pyramid scheme. Yes. And you can say this is a relationship all you want, but
at the end of the day,
you're just trying to change the language so that it's more palatable to people, but you're not changing the definition of what you're doing.
You know what I want to know, though?
Tell me.
What? Jeremy, I want to know if you've ever been treasure hunting.
Ish.
Okay,
You know,
so
that,
you know
what it
is.
is. Yes.
Yes,
This
of
is the
course I
first
do.
person on the podcast that knows this.
You're the first person we've ever mentioned it to that knew what it
Well,
was.
high five
Yes,
there.
high five.
Yes.
Okay.
No, yeah, I totally know what it is.
What do you call it in French? Chasse au trésor.
Yes, exactly. Chasse au trésor.
Of course, it would just be the same.
Oh my God.
But Jessica, you know what it is now.
Yeah, well, Sarah told me about it in one of
Oh.
our very early episodes, and I can't believe it. I never participated in this.
The thing is, on my podcast, I like to have open endings, and I've got a few people telling me they've had like mystical encounters with Jesus or God, and I never disregard those moments. I just I listen, and then I'm like, how do you look back on those moments now that you've deconstructed or deconverted? And it's always really interesting. And one person I interviewed, she told me about treasure hunting. So treasure hunting is, I've done it ish, but it's been a really long time, and I'm not sure it was totally treasure hunting, but somehow it's like you get into a space where you're like, come on, Holy Spirit, hit me.
Give me clues.
And yeah, you give me clues, and of like, we're going to go out and try to bless people and find the treasures that God wants us to find so we can tell them about the gospel and maybe get them saved. Or it's really
Pray for healing.
yes. And you can so then get pictures in your head, like maybe a blue scarf,
Like red shirt, blue pants. Yeah.
something and then you go out with those clues, and then you try to find people who match the description. And sometimes you had like 3 clues, but the person only has one. You're like, ha, it's enough. Let's go for that person. And then you start talking with them, and then stuff happens, or it doesn't, or it gets weird, or it gets awkward, or it gets holy, whatever. I don't know. I've never really been really comfortable with that, and never really went full on. Anyway, but Natasha, who was on my podcast, told me that story of, so she was at home or at church, I don't remember. And basically she got the name, she got how the person looked, she did a drawing. She sent it to her husband, who was treasure hunting. And she also had like specific details about the person's life. And so her husband texted back being like, I've got this person in front of me. She has the name. She looks like you said, and she has the issues you thought you received from God. And you know, those moments of like total mystery, I don't have a real explanation for it. And I let that moment just be. But I think I would say that's the exception that doesn't confirm the rule, because there's a lot of treasure hunting where it's just like, it's just weird and it just doesn't make sense. But sometimes stuff like that happens.
Weird coincidences happen all the time in life. And whether or not they're coincidences is just like it depends on your specific belief in a higher power or whatever. And whatever you believe is great. And what sucks about these things, though, is that an experience like this, if you're having doubts, an experience like this can tie you to Christianity longer than you might need to be tied to it. True. Because you might be like, well, what about that moment? That moment was so strong, and maybe it was just a coincidence.
I found within Christianity, they would always dismiss any sort of spiritual experience outside of Christianity as the demonic.
Yes.
And so that's a great scapegoat if you want only your point of view to be like the holy one, the safe one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But like recognizing that humans across all cultures have spiritual experiences and practices and things that make them feel connected to the universe or a higher power. And like, I don't know that we need to have an in-depth explanation for that. Like, I'm okay with like just letting that be a mysterious moment.
Yeah.
It's like, whether it's a coincidence or not.
And you look at just religion and history in general, you're just like, people have probably had these experiences for as long as humans have been around. There have been people that just absolutely need an explanation for it. And then there might be people like us that are like, it's okay if we don't know. It's okay to not know. That's what I've had to really grapple with, in my adult life. It's like, it's fine to not have the answers.
I feel so much better since I acknowledge mystery and I don't know, and seeing the beauty and pluralism and other spiritualities. But the thing is, I think the three of us, our starting point is Christianity. But what I've noticed also is that fundamentalism can be everywhere, even on the progressive side. You can be extreme wherever outside religion. And it just makes me really aware of this. And I know that for me, because I've been so much into my Christianity and the specific charismatic evangelical kind, now intellectually, I'm totally unable to go full on anything.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I did meditation. I
Yeah.
took interest in different spiritualities, but it's more like an intellectual interest. Like, oh, it makes my heart go warm to know that there's a diverse answers to complex questions, or that there's no answers really.
And we're all just trying to find it.
Yes. And I know what my podcast, what I like to do is just open windows. Like, you can look it up like this, but I'm no specialist. It's just like, hey, well, do the same question, there's different answers. Maybe they're not really answers, but point of views. And it makes me really feel good, but I can't really intellectually go full on because I've been flying high for too long. And for my mental health, I'm still okay with mystery and some kind of divine something.
Yeah, like any kind of extremism, I find I have an aversion to.
Yeah, me
Like
too.
and I just feel like with Sarah and you probably feel the same, is that we have to really manage how much deconstruction content we consume. We talk about that a lot. And I'm sure that everyone feels this way. It's like, we can't dive into every single subject head on and just immerse ourselves in
Some of
everything.
it is so dark.
Yes.
Like sexual abuse scandals in the church. Yes, we will touch on that, but that cannot be the only topic we touch on, or else we're both going to burn out.
Yeah, the burnout is real. Like you said that you had spiritual burnout. Is that, do you still feel that way?
No, I feel in a much peaceful place now. That's, I think, the reason why I've been able to be like, hey, let's do a podcast, because I feel less anger than in the past. I've been able to rebuild myself and reconstruct. And so, yeah, I'm way more peaceful, but still Enneagram type 1, if you're aware of this, I'm just like, hey, I'm not going to leave this that way. I'm just like, I need to, it's somehow part of my maybe Christianity, but it's like, I want to reclaim my story and my beliefs somehow. And what do I keep? What do I leave? And for a long time, actually, when I left the evangelical movement, I left myself alone. And at one point, my spirituality became so, it was like the air I breathed. It was like nothing really concrete. It was just like the universe. And at one point, I wanted to be like, okay, so I'm feeling good because less pressure. And I remember when I went to, so from time to time, not very often, but from time to time, I go to a Reformed church. So like mainland historical church. I don't know how you say it in Canada. Yeah. And I remember the pastor say, you can be a Christian and not believe in God. And I was like, I actually believed that, but it was crazy for me to hear a pastor saying, you can be a Christian and not believe in God. I was like, oh my God.
Sounds like the United Church.
And I was like, that's cool. And so I started really digging into the French tradition and theologians and intellectuals and authors and stuff. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of stuff in French.
Gosh, a lot of the philosophers, a lot of the Enlightenment thinkers were French.
Yes. But that conversation is not really happening really in the evangelical community in France. It's more like the Reformed tradition is more rich of like critical views on religion, but it's not very sexy. In North America, your books, they're kind of cool. They look cool. They're less academic. And
that's because we love capitalism so much. We
so
have
much.
to sell.
We have
sell,
great
sell.
book covers.
Yeah.
Yes, great book covers. Exactly. When I see some in French, it's just like, looks too heady, but it's interesting too.
There's one thing I wanted to bring up with you, just like, I'm not sure about the political climate in Belgium, but I know that France has a huge influence on Quebec, and I get stuck on Quebec TikTok sometimes. And there is a huge there's like a very militant secularism that is like, we don't want there to be hijabs. We don't want there to be any sort of religious symbolism in day-to-day public life. Like, we don't want people wearing a hijab or a cross necklace. And what do you think of this militant secularism, and where do you think that's stemming from within French culture?
But the French, they're really big on that topic. Like we call it la laïcité in French. And it's like again, I'm no specialist about that, but it's just like the separation of church and state. La laïcité is very big in France, and like
Laïcité, comment est-ce qu'on appelle ça?
Laicite, la laïcité.
Oh, secularism, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. I didn't know it was that word in English.
It's like translated. Yeah. Okay.
But it's funny because a few years ago I had like a book written by like the official evangelical Protestant French instance about, hey, we invented secularism, like in the US, like we wanted to have freedom of religion, and how secularism is lived in France it's really nerve-wracking, and it's like you can't show any religious signs and stuff. So that's how it's lived. But officially, it's more like everybody should have the freedom to have their beliefs and experience religion, and then how we share it. But basically, where the point was like, we have the right to share our beliefs because of secularism. But mostly how it's lived is if an institution or something gets too religious, people will very often be like, hey, because of secularism, you can't. And so there's always a public conversation about, well, actually, and it's really blurry, it's really complicated, and it's always tense.
That sounds like a mess.
Yeah.
How is that any better than Christian nationalism? Like, I don't think that's fair to say that you can't even wear
whatever. You can't wear hijab. You can't wear.
I agree that things should be secular, but like there is a kind of a point that you got to let people just express themselves the way that they want to express themselves.
Yeah. If it's respectful, that's okay.
I think it's interesting though, like you're a republic in France, as is America, and you had a revolution to kind of get yourself away from monarchy. Our paradigm in Canada is very different. We didn't have a revolution. We're like gradually like, hey, can we have like a little more freedom? But like the monarch signing off on everything that happens, like as it's more like symbolically, but they are still signing off on everything that happens. So I think our point of view is quite different because like England still has like the Church of England, and the monarch is the head of the Church of England, and more symbolic, but it's a big thing.
Secularism really makes me feel good. It's really reassuring to know that somehow there's rules and there's freedom of speech, but that it needs to be framed. And that's why like Christian nationalism is really scaring me, because
terrifying.
You can tell that basically, even if there's la laïcité or secularism, you can tell that it just finds a way somehow to impose a religious agenda, or that it would take religious ideas to impose an agenda, but those people are not religious at all. It's like abortion or LGBT or whatever. It's just
they're using the guise of Christianity to gain what they want.
Yes, and it's not a religious issue. It's a political issue, and it's just like, don't mix things up. But because they're close, it appealed to religious people also, and that's the thing that really gets on my nerves. Is that basically a lot of churches are filled with good-willing people, and they don't notice that there's like the extreme right that's like everywhere somehow, and the fact that they want to kind of impose an agenda like world invasion with the Seven Mountains agenda and stuff. It's just this kind of, we live a pluralistic worldview where we can be respectful and listen to each other and see the beauty and still be Christians if you want to, without being so imperialistic. And it just gets on my nerves like, hey, you can believe whatever you want, but please don't hurt or impose your ideas, even if you think that it's a good idea because it comes from God. It's still your point of view of what God wants.
I think it's so hard because like I think it's really interesting what you're saying, Jérémie, about how they will borrow those ideas or use the language. Like Trump doesn't know shit all about the Bible. Like he doesn't give a fuck. He wants to win. He wants power. And he is using and exploiting the people that have those beliefs. I know in France that it's quite politically secular, and the same in Canada. Like even if a politician was evangelical, like they are typically not mentioning their beliefs. But in the United States, like most people like wouldn't vote for someone that's not Christian. And they're always bringing God into it. God bless America.
Yeah, that's a different ball game. Yes.
Yeah, it's a different tool for power. And I think that's where there really is not a clear separation between church and state in America.
But power, that word you just said, that's the thing. That's the really important thing, because at the end of the day, it's always a power trip or a reassuring, like we want to take the power to reassure our insecurities or our beliefs or our traditions or whatever. I think somehow a friend of mine, a pastor actually, said the gospel, it's the refusal of the temptation of power. And I was like, my God, this is so good. Just like,
I love that.
I say it again because it's important. It's refusing the temptation for power. And my Christian spirituality, if I can call it that way, is anything, or at least I try. It's like not power. It's like gentleness or just kindness or the little things. I love that bit in the Bible where God is not in the thunder. He's not into the wind. He's in the whisper. And so it's just like, I know what I want to do with Hérétique. It's basically just pinpoint everything that's around authoritarian systems. And I'm just like, that's what's bumming me, because it's not really, I think, what Jesus meant. Mm-hmm. And I'm not wanting to go to a purity of it's just like, oh, let's go back to what somehow I'm just like, doesn't make sense. That's not.
Oh, like what Jesus said versus how it's playing out in like far right American Christianity. No. I don't even see how they are able to marry the two, because it's so opposite.
When you want power, you'll just do anything to get it. You'll justify it in any way. So they'll take any verse in the Bible that they think is going to help them, and they're going to use it. And it's just really sad. And it's so transparent what they're doing, but people fall for it.
I'd rather have a conversation with somebody saying, I'm feeling insecure about, I don't know, I don't understand how the things go really fast and issues are really complex and it's making me feel uncomfortable. I'm like, hey, I feel uncomfortable too. Or there's a lot of things I don't understand, especially if we come from sheltered backgrounds where the world was black and white, and it's difficult. But
the vulnerability is seen as weakness.
Yes, I know.
It shouldn't be.
I think the vulnerability, the thing that we're doing right now, the three of us, is, I think, stronger than what they're doing, which is just masking all of their feelings and manipulating people. And there's a lot of pastors in the States, especially, that like are all about like, oh, masculine and you can't show your feelings and men have to be the leaders.
Mark Driscoll.
Yeah, I'm mostly just talking about Mark Driscoll, but
you know who that
Mark
is?
Driscoll. Yes. I listened to The Rise and Fall of Martial Church. My God, so good.
Such a good podcast.
Good, but the main critique was like, the conclusion was like, oh yes, let's not have a toxic person back in leadership. And the main critic was like, well, no, what we should be aware of is how the system allows people that toxic to get into power.
I mean, it was done by Christianity Today, so there's only so much we can ask of them, but they did about half the job that they should have done. And then, they don't, I think it's really hard to confront the systems that you're a part of. Yeah. And that's a huge job. But that's why I really hope that our podcast and your podcast can even just add to the voices of people just saying, wait a minute, these systems are corrupt and they're a breeding ground for narcissism. And I'm not saying all churches.
But if you're a narcissist, a male dominated church where you're saying you're hearing from God, people are going to follow you blindly.
Yeah.
I thought we could do a story time with Sarah in French. Just for your...
En français.
En français.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Oh mon
What do
Dieu.
you think? Est-ce qu'on pourrait faire une histoire avec Sarah en français? We have like story time with Sarah.
Yes,
it's a segment where we
read a story of the Bible.
Okay.
Welcome to Story Time with Sarah. Sit back, relax, and enjoy a story from our favorite book, the Bible.
So Sarah will read a story of the Bible, but in French. So I'll just sit here and,
Do you have any requests?
No.
Fun fact, Jess, I used to read the Bible in French sometimes too.
Oh my God, of course you did.
What are we going to do? We're going to go we'll go to the Gospels. The Gospels are fun.
So you read a bit and then we react? Or...
Yeah, I guess so.
That I will give a paraphrase. On va switcher en français maintenant. Je pourrais être la personne qui cherche mes mots des fois. As-tu une histoire que tu aimerais que je partage ou juste n'importe quoi?
No, go for it. I don't have a favorite really.
OK. Like, l'histoire avec les cochons, il met les Hespéries dans les cochons. Ça, c'est toujours bon.
Ok, allez, vas-y.
So,
Ça va être folklorique.
OK. So, on a Matthieu 8 à 24. Est-ce que tu as ouvert ton Bible?
Ah non, pardon, j'allais t'écouter, tout simplement.
C'est super important, mais
OK. Attends,
les écouteurs pourraient ouvrir leur Bible, mais moi, je vais commencer. So,
Matthieu 28?
oui, non, Matthieu 8.
8. Verset 24.
Ouais.
OK.
24, OK. So, OK. Et voici, il s'éleva sur la mer une si grande tempête que la barque était couverte par les flottes. Et lui, il dormait. Les disciples étant approchés le réveillèrent et dirent, Seigneur, sauve-nous, nous périssons. Il leur dit, pourquoi? I don't think this is right.
What is going on over here?
I was trying to find the demon story, and I was like, this is not the demon story.
No, but it's a good story too.
You want to do that one then?
Yeah, I think it's like the pigs is a more funny story, but
this one essaie de comme like plus philosophique.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
OK, je vais continuer. So, il leur dit, pourquoi avez-vous peur? Gens de peur de foi. Alors il se leva, menaça les vents et la mer, et il y eut un grand calme. Ces hommes furent saisis d'étonnement. Quel est celui-ci? Disait-il, à qui obéissent même les vents et la mer? Lorsqu'il fut à l'autre bord, dans le pays des Gadaréniens, deux démoniaques sortant des sépulcres virant au devant de lui. Il était si furieux que personne n'osait passer par là. Et voici, il s'écrie, qu'y a-t-il entre nous et toi, Fils de Dieu? Es-tu venu ici pour nous tourmenter avant le temps? Il y avait loin d'eux un grand troupeau de pourceaux, okay, we're here, qui passait. Les démons priant Jésus, disant, si tu nous chasses, envoie-nous dans ce troupeau de pourceaux. Il leur dit, allez, ils sortirent et entrent dans les pourceaux. Et voici, tout le troupeau se précipita des pentes s'escarper dans la mer et ils périrent dans les eaux. Ce qui les faisant pète s'enfuirent et allèrent dans la ville raconter tout ce qui s'était passé et ce qui était arrivé au démoniaque. Alors toute la ville sortit de leur rencontre, dit Jésus, et qu'ils le virent et ils supplièrent de quitter leur territoire. So, ils ont été comme,
well done.
Fuck off, Jésus.
I could just hear you struggling I don't know what you're saying.
I don't know.
Like, oh.
Well, c'est comme les mots que je n'utilise pas assez souvent.
Ah bah oui, c'est sûr.
Right? C'est pas comme, I don't know, c'est pas comme les mots qu'il y a dans les textes que je lis habituellement, mais je trouve ça intéressant parce que comme Jésus a mis les esprits démoniques dans les cochons, puis les pauvres cochons ont tombé, puis ils ont décidé. Like, pourquoi?
Ah non. Je sais, je sais pas trop quoi faire de cette histoire, moi, personnellement.
Like, pourquoi est-ce que c'est dans la Bible? Qu'est-ce que c'est comme le point moral ou philosophique de voir comme juste like les cochons qui meurent?
Well, I understood one thing you said, which was, why is this in the Bible? And that's a very good question.
Yeah,
I asked that a lot.
Pas.
Pourquoi c'est ça dans la Bible? Is that what you said?
I was listening to you and I was like, I don't know. There's like stories that still hit home, but this one doesn't really hit home. I'm just like, okay,
No.
just like demons going into pigs jumping from the cliff. Okay, and then people are scared. Yes, I understand why they were scared and said to Jesus, "Can you leave, please?" Because
Well, they're just like, je ne veux pas que tu restes ici. Like, fuck off.
Yes.
Leave our city.
Ouais.
But not everything
Yeah.
has to be profound or holy. Like there are many parts, like one of our tagline on Instagram is like exploring, like all things weird in Christianity. And some things are just weird.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a really weird culture because there's some weird stuff in the book. And I think also because maybe we don't have the accurate glasses to really understand, or it's a really difficult and complex book. And I know that sometimes when I speak with people who, I don't know, theologians or people who really know more, I'm like, do you need to do like 7 years of like theology and know Greek and Hebrewic and everything to kind of get it right-ish?
Mhm.
And the thing is,
you have to jump through all these hoops to justify why this kind of story would be in the Bible. Like,
oh yes. I mean, just to understand the point of it, and somehow I think that the fact that with printing, with Gutenberg, the fact that and the Protestant Reformation, that everybody could get the Bible, I think somehow it's interesting because it's like it's not always like the Catholics and the priesthood that had like the power. Everybody's like power to the people. Somehow I think it's interesting, but still the danger of the fact that everybody can get their hands on it and just give whatever they want as an interpretation. And if you read it literally, it's very dangerous. That's the kind of Christianity I grew up in, like taking it like first degree. And I think it's really dangerous.
Like you can use the Bible to justify any ideology. And when Jessica and I, talk about different topics, we try and include multiple perspectives. If we're talking about Christian or biblical topics like creation or speaking in tongues. But the scary part is you're like, anyone can justify anything.
Yes.
When people are like, the Bible is clear.
It's not clear at all. And that's the thing. It's just like, it scares me, the fact that if we don't really take it really seriously and have a lot of knowledge and studies and stuff, we can make the Bible say whatever. And
well, people that have studied it for years will have polarized views from other people that have studied it for years. But it's like, it's like Plato, Aristotle, it's like the Quran. It's like there are so many different historical texts or like religious texts that like it's based on interpretation, and we were not in the person's head that was writing it, and certainly the writers of the Bible did not think they were writing an infallible book directly from God. Like Paul was writing letters to specific churches being like, bro, you're doing this wrong and this is going well. Like it doesn't as much as I'm not a big fan of Paul, I'm like, bro had no idea that he was writing.
He doesn't know that he's going to be writing things that in 2000 years people are going to be reading and utilizing for their political agenda.
I know.
Yeah.
No, that's why I'm really, I don't know how you say it in English, but going really lightly with those texts.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm respectful, but I'm like, sometimes people say to me, you never really quote the Bible or speak about theology on your podcast. I'm like, that's not my point. I'm no pastor. I'm not a theologian. I'm just listening to people. It's more of a sociological approach than a biblical one.
It's a relationship, not an institution.
It's in a relationship. I think we have come full circle.
Full circle. Yes.
I think this podcast can be called, it's not a podcast, it's a relationship.
It's like a relationship.
That's good. That's good. That's good. Do it.
Yeah.
But
it's been so lovely to have you on.
Thank you.
And vice versa, I guess we're going to be on your feed. So
so maybe
let's having us on yours.
Yeah, let's plug all of our individual things, I guess.
Yeah. Do you want to do our social media, Sarah? Do you think you can?
I can. Let's see if I can get it. I'm notorious for fucking it up. So if you want to find us, you can go to heaveninaminiskirt.com. That's heaveninaminiskirt.com. Faut être bilingue pour tout le monde.
I love the song at the beginning and the fact that it's a true song, right?
This is a song that we used to sing at Christian camp. So you can't get to Heaven in a Miniskirt. Yes.
It's funny. It's funny.
And we are
on
Heaven
Instagram,
in a Miniskirt on Instagram. We're at Heaven in a Miniskirt. Same on TikTok, and Miniskirt Pod on X, formerly Twitter, but we don't usually go on there.
Yeah. Twitter's a cesspool.
I'm going to put the links in the show notes.
Yeah, and same with us.
Yeah.
Yes.
So do you want to plug your thing?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Hérétique podcast, and you can find the podcast on Spotify, Deezer, Apple Podcast, wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'm really happy that we can share both our podcast to our audience. And to the English-speaking people who listen to mine, and to the, I guess, more like Québécois kind of audience on your side. I think like there's not enough content about that, and those are really important issues. And it's also nice to gain perspective here in Europe and over there on your side in Canada, to know that maybe with slightly different cultures and maybe slightly different cultural times, but that the conversation is happening, and that we need to send, I don't know, to talk about it. It's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Nice.
Thanks.
Thank
nice
you
to
so
be in the
much.
space. C'était un plaisir de
and
t'avoir ici.
Go check. Sorry, check your Instagram. I'm not really so active on Instagram. It kind of like annoys me that you need to be all that on Instagram.
That's why I'm glad I have Sarah. She does it.
Yeah,
I don't.
yeah,
If I come
you
to
do-
the memes, I
it's
do
funny.
a lot of Instagram.
It's funny. I like your Instagram. It's really
Oh,
funny.
good. I'm glad.
Yes,
I'm glad you
yes.
like it.
Well,
Well,
Sorry,
merci.
you were saying.
Thank you.
Have a
This
good
was,
night.
so fun. And thank
Yes.
you for staying up so late when you have
Yeah.
two tiny children.
Oh,
it's only 2:30 where I am. 2:30 p.m. So
have a good afternoon then.
I will.
And I'm going to go have some supper,
Okay.
dinner, whatever you
Have a
call
great
it.
supper.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
See you
Bye.
soon.
See
Bye-bye.
ya.